Okay, yep. Let's begin. So, what is econometrics? Yeah, I have mentioned before in econometrics, you will not only use statistic approach, but you will use economics theory and also mathematical approach. Okay. So this is the relevant reading for this session. The material in this lecture are based on Chapter 1 of Jeffrey Woolrich, Introductory Econometrics, a Modern Approach, 6th edition. Okay. I do not, you don't have to get the 6th edition. You know, if you have other edition, you can use that as well, because basically the substance and the material is going to be the same, but maybe the example and the questions is going to be a bit different. But basically the substance is the same. So if you have other edition of this book, it's okay. You can use that. Okay. So what is econometrics? Econometrics, that's a collection of mathematical and statistical tools combined with economics theory. Yeah. So the economics theory is basically the assumption about world, right? So you have taken introductory to economics 1 and introductory to economics 2, and you know that to understand the world, we have to understand the world from the point of view of economics. We have economic theory for that, like for example, demand and supply, right? It's like the simplification of the real world. Now, with econometrics, we kind of try to make sense of those theory or find the real life evidence of those theories using mathematical and statistical rule. Like for example, with the demand theory, is it true that demand really works that way in real world? Then we kind of want to quote unquote prove that through collecting data and do analysis with those data using mathematical and statistical approach. So that's basically econometrics. Econometrics is uh, uh, one of the tools that you can use to do economic analysis. Yeah. So one day, if you're going to be you're going to work in public sector and you need to formulate policy, then econometrics is one of the tools that you can use. Okay. Or if you go to the private sector, but you kind of also need to explain the economic phenomena, you can also use econometrics. It's a powerful tools, and I hope you can really have fun in the econometrics course because it's an important tools for you. So why do we study econometrics? Econometrics is used to, so there are several points that we're going to discuss in here. So the first one, we can use econometrics to measure population quantities of interest. Okay, so if you remember in your statistic course, we kind of want to know the population parameter, right? But we don't always know the population parameter because of the population is very huge and it's a very big scope. So we do not get our hand to the every individuals in the population. And then what we do is we're going to take a representative samples from that, and then we're going to do analysis from that. The result of the analysis is the best estimate of the population parameters, right? So that's what econometrics do as well. It can be used as the measure of the population quantities of interest, or in the other words, it can be used as the best, it can be used to find the best estimate of the population parameters. Okay, so there is an example in here. For example, if you are interested to analyze the college wage gaps, which mean like, for example, now you are college students, right? You're going to graduate with a college degree, but there are other people who whose education is only in the high school degree, for example, and you want to know between these people who graduate high school and people who graduate college, is there a wage gaps between them in terms of their, so in the future, is there a wage gaps between them? And to analyze this or to find the evidence of this, what you're going to do is you're going to take sample, right? Because the population is very huge and you don't know like the real parameters of the population. So what you're going to do is you're going to take sample and do estimate, and the result of that is going to be the best estimate or the best estimation of the population parameter. Yeah, econometrics will help you to do that. Okay, so that's the measure of population quantities of interest. And then the econometrics, it can be used to find or formulate, actually it's more like formulating instead of finding, to estimate the economic parameters. Yeah, so there is a good example in here. So like for example, if you want to investigate the price elasticity of demand for cigarettes, then you can do that by collecting data, and then from the data you can make sense of, okay, from this data, what's the price elasticity of demand for cigarettes? And to do that, you can use econometrics. And then like, for example, you can also do in other topics like price elasticity um, of gasoline, for example, and then also labor elasticity, for example. Those parameters will be very helpful to formulate public policy, and you can and econometrics can help you to do that. And then also you can also determine the effect of certain treatment on certain outcomes. Now, this is what we call impact evaluation. Yeah. So okay, this is a good example in here. You can determine the effects of certain treatments on certain outcomes. So for example, giving early childhood education, will that going to have an effect or any effect in that matters in the long-term academic achievement? You can evaluate this by using econometrics. Yeah, so the treatment is the early childhood education, and the outcomes is the academic achievement. So how the childhood education is going to affect the long-term academic achievement. You can also do this in the setting of public policy, like for example, how the subsidi BBM is going to affect the demand of the gasoline, for example, or how the beasiswa untuk siswa miskin is going to affect the long-term academic achievement of that child or of the children that get the treatment. Okay, so those are an example of impact evaluation. You can use econometrics as tools to identify that. Okay, and the last one, you can use econometrics to test or mediate between competing economic theories. Yeah, so there are a lot of theories in economics, yeah, and one of the topics that we're going to discuss here is in the education economics. So in education economics, there are two theories that's going to explain the education outcome of the students. Okay, so we have signaling, and then human capital approach of the college wage premium, or college wage premium. So in the signaling theory, I will start with the human capital theory first. So in the human capital theories, it is said that the longer someone stay in school, the longer the education attainment, the more education that they get is going to lead to more productivity, and then more productivity is going to lead to higher wage. So that's one theory. And then there is also signaling theory that say that those in the firms, so the firms is going to take a look at people who have more education and perceive them as more as have better performance in terms of working, so that they're going to hire them. And then after they're going to hire them, it means that those with the more education is going to get higher wages than those with the less education. Okay, so this is a different approach between the human capital and the signaling theory. So we can use econometrics to test between these theories, which one is going to be more applicable and in real life. Okay, like for example, in the case of Indonesia alone, for example, in Indonesia, which theory is going to more and better explain how the labor market work, work. Okay, so that's another use for econometrics. And then this is a question from your friends previously, how econometrics differs from statistics. Okay, so let's just skip to this slide, okay, because it's actually the same slide. Okay, so how econometrics differs from statistics. So there is a substantial overlap and interaction between statistic and econometrics. The difference arises due to the nature of the economic phenomena, which often preclude a straightforward application of standard statistical methods. So like I told you before, with the statistic approach, you already have all of the statistic theory, all of the statistic rules and guidance. And those guidance and those rules from statistic might not always be able to explain the economic phenomena, right? Like for example, we have supply and demand. Supply and demand have their own theories. They have law of supply, they have law of demand. And these are not explained in the statistical rules, right? Because it's not very applicable to explain this with the statistical rules. So we use economics theory in here, okay? So when the standard method of statistic cannot be used, economic theory may suggest alternative approach that allows us to answer the question of interest, yeah? So if you have a question of interest in the topics of economics, like for example, like we have discussed before, what's the effect of gasoline subsidy? What's the effect of income tax? What's the effect of early childhood education or whatever it is? It's not always, the statistic rules may not always be able to answer that. So you need alternative approach that incorporate the economic theory. That alternative approach is econometrics, okay? Econometrics deals with formalize this method and proving that they work, okay? So you can use econometrics to help you make sense of that research questions that you have. And then more importantly, economists are interested in causal relationship instead of correlation. So you might remember in your last statistic course that your lecture is going to underline the importance difference between causal relationship and correlation. And in statistics, mostly you're going to discuss about correlation, right? But economists, actually, we are more interested in the causal relationship. The causal relationship can be answered. One of the way to answer the causal relationship is with econometrics. Okay, so you will go in the more detailed and complex analysis in econometrics compared to when you were taking statistic course. Okay. Okay, so why we need econometrics? We need econometrics because, okay, theories often give the sign of an effect, but not its magnitude. Okay, so with the theory, you know the flow, right? You know the transmission of something, but and then the direction of the variable that you analyze, but you do not know the magnitude, right? You don't know the magnitude, so that's why the theory alone is not enough. Okay, like for example, the effect of higher cigarette excise tax on cigarette demand. Okay, the effect of higher cigarette excise tax on cigarette demand. So the theory is going to tell you that when the tax is higher, then the price is going to be higher, then the quantity of demanded is going to be lower, right? So that's what the theory is going to tell you. Well, is the theory wrong? Not necessarily, because most likely that's what's going to happen, right? Once the price is going to be higher, people will demand less of that good, of the cigarette, right? But we don't know how much the cigarette tax is going to affect the behavior of the cigarette demand, right? To know how much how much the effect of excise tax on cigarette demand, then we need something measurable, something we can measure quantitatively. So that's where econometrics is going to be handy. Yeah, and this is very essential for policy analysis. Yeah, because well, tax is part of the public policy, and if you there is some point if you can define the effect of a tax, then you can make sure that the rate of the tax that you choose as a public policy maker is going to be the right rate. Yeah, because if the tax is going too high from the right rate, then people might cheat, on their taxation. If it's lower, then the revenue from tax is going to be optimum. Yeah, and to help you to analyze this, you have econometrics. Okay, and then the prediction from theory are often ambiguous and rely on unknown parameters. Yeah, so because we don't know the real parameters in this world, the real population parameters, so the prediction from the theory could be ambiguous. What do we mean by could be ambiguous? Sometimes the real world evidence is going to be in line with the theories. Why? Because of a lot of factors. Yeah. Um, so that's why we need something more than the theory to explain this ambiguous evidence. Okay. Like for example, will a higher wage induce the individuals to work more hours or less? Yeah. So we kind of hope if we give people incentive of higher wage, they are going to be willing to work more hours, right? But in the real world, it's not always like that. Maybe there are other factors that make people do not budge, even though they are given incentive of more higher wage. To explain this, then we need to analyze real life evidence, and you can analyze real life evidence using econometrics. Okay, so that's it. Why we need econometrics. Okay, before I move on to the observational data, do you have any question? Not yet. Okay, I will continue. Okay, so before we continue, we're going to discuss the distinction between correlation and causation. Okay, and I will share with you a video. You can watch the video together. It's about 3 minutes. And then from that, we will start a discussion in this class. Okay, so let me share the video for you. Okay, can you hear the sound from the video?
Not yet, ma'am.
Not yet. Okay. What about now?
Not yet,
Not yet,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Not yet. Okay. Wait a minute.
It's a whole game. The correlation is worth nothing. that knowing that two things. So what is correlation?
not
Correlation
yet.
means two things happen together.
Already,
It
you
means
can hear.
one
Okay.
thing happens.
Okay. Now let me reply this.
Freakonomics.
Correlation versus causality is everything. It's a whole game. That correlation is worth nothing. That knowing that two things. So what is correlation? Correlation means two things happen together. Okay, causality means one thing happens and that causes a second. From a public policy perspective, causality is all we care about. And an example we give in the book is about when the Chicago Bulls are going for the championship. And what the mayor of Chicago has seen over time is that whenever the Bulls win the NBA Finals, people in Chicago are ecstatic. Okay, so he puts out a decree that morning. Okay, the morning of the 7th game of the NBA Finals, which says all Chicagoans must be ecstatically happy today. Okay, and he thinks, look, every time in the past when the Chicagoans have been ecstatically happy, we've won the championship. Okay, so if I can just make sure we're all really happy, we're guaranteed to win the championship. Okay, that's a silly case in which you realize that correlation and causality are totally different, right? If you get the direction of causality wrong, it's hopeless, it's meaningless. And I think people don't really get that. People don't understand that you really need to isolate the causal effect. And that my entire academic life has been devoted to figuring out tricky ways to get at causality, because the world doesn't just offer you up causality. Okay, what you see in the world is correlation. What the world gives you is things are moving together or they aren't.
You could say, when I walk out today and it's raining really hard and everybody's got an umbrella, man, if those people would only not walk around with their umbrellas, it would stop raining, because every time I see it raining, people have umbrellas and they must be causing the rain. But they're not. No, that didn't come out right, did it?
You know, if someone hates Christmas, let's say there was a Grinch who wanted to get rid of Christmas, one thing he might try to do would be to ban Christmas cards, right? Because every year, one way to know Christmas is right around the corner is that Christmas cards start showing up in your mailbox. So you might think, if I could just figure out a way to keep Christmas cards from showing up in my mailbox, I could get rid of Christmas altogether. And that's a classic example of how you can get correlation and causality completely backwards if you're not thinking straight. One of my favorite examples of correlation versus causality has to do with crime. Okay, so if you just look at a city like Washington, D.C. and say compare it to Denver, you see there's lots more crime in Washington, D.C. than Denver. Well, what causes that difference in crime? Well, if you look at the number of police in Washington, D.C., there are also many more police per capita than there are in Denver. And so a logical conclusion you come to is, well, maybe police cause crime, right? Wherever you go, wherever you go to a place that has a lot of crime, you're guaranteed to find lots of police. Okay? And is it possible that police cause crime? Well, no, of course not. That's not the answer. The fact is that crime causes police. When there's a lot of crime in a place, the political response is to hire lots of police. When there's no crime, why would you bother paying the cost of having police around? And indeed, for something like 25 years, the criminologists seem to think that police didn't have any effect on crime because they looked at correlations instead of causality. It's only been in the last 20 years that people have come to understand that the fact that we have lots of police where there's lots of crime is because the crime causes the police and not vice versa.
Okay, so that's the video from Freakonomics. By the way, it's a good book, Freakonomics, if you want to read that. So that's the difference between correlation and causation. Let me, correlation and causation. So maybe one of you, do you want to summarize what's the difference between correlation and causation, please? Yep, Michael.
If I have to say, causation is when one event causes another. Correlation is when two events commonly occur in approximation to each other. And some people make the mistake that because these two events are causing one in close proximity to each other, one causes the other.
Okay, very good. So it really summarizes it well, yeah. So a lot of time, we know that a lot of things can go together in the same direction or hand in hand, but it's not always that one causes the other. This happens a lot with the economic phenomena. So you might see that there are two economic phenomena that go together. You might think that one causes the other. It's not always like that. We need to do a deeper analysis to finally conclude there is a causation between two variables or two phenomena. Okay. So that's the difference between causation and correlation. So like I mentioned before, economists, they are very interested in finding causation relationship instead of correlation relationship. But it doesn't mean that knowing the correlation between variables, it's not going to be helpful because most of the time it's very difficult to finally conclude causation. So often what we get is correlation, and that's still helpful, yeah, to analyze public policy, economic phenomena, and things like that. Okay, so let me get back to the slide. Okay. Oh. Let's continue our discussion between correlation and causation. So we have some question in here. We have, let's go to this slide. Yeah, we have 3 questions in here. The first one is smoking and cancer, or likelihood of contracting cancer. Do you think this is correlation and causation, and why? Can any one of you answer this question and share your opinion, please?
Could I?
Okay.
Can I
Yes, of course.
I think that is definitely causation, because if you compare people who don't smoke and then people who do smoke, you could probably see that the people who don't smoke don't have cancer as much as people who do smoke.
Okay.
So
okay.
I think that's probably a pretty decent metric to compare like the variables.
Okay. Anybody else maybe have different opinion? You can share. Okay, and then let's continue to the next question. Years of schooling and labor market wage, is this correlation or is this causation? Is it true that the more years you go to school, then it will cause your labor market wage going to be higher? Is it true or is it just correlation? What do you think?
Ma'am, I think it's correlation, since there are some people who can have a higher market wage but don't have as much education as the others.
Okay. Anybody else have different answer than your friend?
Can I add to that, ma'am?
Sure.
The years of schooling, there's like a lot of various factors why the person had a lot of years of schooling. It could be that they originally failed a lot of classes. It could be that their institution it takes more time to graduate, and like there's a lot of other factors than simply they're learning a lot more, which is why they're getting paid a lot more, or vice versa.
Okay, good point. Good point. So let's move on to the third question. Bantuan siswa miskin and student achievement. Do you think getting bantuan siswa miskin is going to make student achievement better, or do you think it's just the correlation?
Well, can I try, ma'am?
Yes, of course.
I think there's a correlation because bantuan siswa miskin doesn't mean that it would directly or significantly impact the achievement. Correlating each other doesn't mean that it only means that the two things correlate, but does not necessarily mean that one thing causes the other.
Okay. Anyone have different opinion?
Can I go again, ma'am?
Of course.
I don't necessarily disagree that it's a correlation, but I think there's an argument to say it's causation, because the bantuan siswa miskin can give opportunities for the siswa miskin to like go to get a student achievement and such. Like it provides the opportunity.
Okay. So interesting, yeah. So with the smoking and cancer, you are sure that it's a causation. Nevertheless, there are actually a lot of factors that can cause cancer. Yeah, not just smoking. Maybe it's their diet, it's their exercise, or it's their morbidity, or it's because they have illness that they get from their parents, transmitted between generations, that kind of illness that I mean. So there are a lot of factors that actually cause cancer. And we also find people who smoke, but they do not get cancer. So is it true? Can we really conclude that smoking is cause of cancer? Can we really conclude that smoking and cancer has causation relationship? The answer is it's not as simple as that. It's the same as the other question as well. So years of schooling and the labor market wage, you say that, oh, it's probably correlation. Is it true? It's not necessarily wrong, but there is also a possibility that you can prove years of schooling as the cause of the labor market wage. And the same case with the bantuan siswa miskin. So what's going to distinct between causation and correlation? Actually, what's going to distinct causation and correlation is your methodology, okay, and not the variable or the object per se. Okay, so with the causation, then you want to kind of control or isolate other factors, like for example, let's take smoking as the example. When you want to prove that smoking is the cause of cancer, then you want to isolate or control other factors other than smoking. So just smoking alone is going to cause cancer. If you can prove that by controlling other factors, then you can conclude that yep, they have a causation relationship. Similar with the other case, if you can prove or have a model that's going to control other variable other than years of schooling, then you can conclude that there is a causation between them. Same with bantuan siswa miskin. And in econometrics, because in economics in general, because we are interested in the causation, our analysis usually is going to be directed there, so, to find the causation. But it's really difficult to have a model that actually can prove causation. Okay, so most of the time you're gonna have correlation as well. But if you can develop a model that going to isolate or control other factors, then you will have a model with causation relationship. But nevertheless, we're not going to discuss how to build such model in the first week, so don't worry about that. But hopefully at the end of the course, you will know what kind of model it is that's going to help us to conclude that we have a causation relationship. Okay, do you have any question in this part? Okay, why is it important for us to control of other factors or to isolate other factors than the variable that we are interested in? Because if we do not control other factors, it's going to be our result or our estimation is going to be biased. Yeah, let's say we say, yeah, smoke cause cancer, but there are other things as well. So like exactly how much smoke cause cancer, that we cannot answer. Why? Because we still have other factors and other variable that also affect cancer. Yeah, so that's what I mean by our estimation is going to be bias, because who knows if other factors that we do not control actually have a higher chance to cause. Hello, it seems like I get disconnected. Sorry about that. That's UGM hotspot for you. Okay, continue. So I told you before that we need to isolate other factors, right? And in other factors to finally conclude that we have a causation relationship. Why it is important to isolate or control other factors? It's because if we do not control other factors, like let's say other factor other than smoking, then the magnitude of how much smoking cause cancer is going to be biased, because it's still affected by other factors. Because who knows if actually what will more likely to cause cancer is actually the other factor instead of smoking. So it is not correct to conclude that smoking cause cancer because we have other factors. But if we control other factors, then it's going to be correct to say that the cause of cancer is smoking. Okay. That's the first point. And the second point, I mentioned before that, okay, there are people who actually smoke, but they do not get cancer. Okay. So does that mean that we can rule out that smoking contribute to the probability of getting cancer? Now, this is where I want you to differentiate between anecdote and the average or general data. Okay, so what we're going to analyze here is the average. Is the average of the population. It's the average of the individual, the average of subject that we are interested in. Yeah, but other than average, there is also outliers, right? Now, the data in the outliers is the anecdotes. If on average, people who smoke get cancer, then we want to put our focus and attention on that average, yeah. Instead of we're going to care about the outlier of people who smoke but do not get cancer. Okay, so please take notes that the analysis in econometrics is always in the scope of the average, not the outliers. The outliers are there, the anecdotes are there, but we focus on the average. Okay, so the general population. Okay, so we're going to move on with the data. There are several types of data that we're going to deal with here. Okay, yep, this slide here. So researchers may encounter two types of data. We have experimental data, and we also have non-experimental data. Yeah, experimental data are collected through controlled experiments on individuals or firms or other entities that we are interested in. Yeah, experimental data, we cannot get it from the lab or field experiments. Yeah. So if you ever heard of the randomized controlled trials, the data that we get from the randomized controlled trials is experimental data. Like, for example, if you want to know the effect of deworming, like in some countries, the incidence of diarrhea in children, in school children, is still high. And we want to know if giving them deworming medicine, whether it's going to help to reduce the diarrhea incidence. So what we do here is we're going to give the deworming medicine to the groups that we call treatment groups, and then we're going to compare the result of the incidence diarrhea with that groups who receive the medicine and the groups who do not receive medicine. This is called randomized controlled trials. And the result, the data and the the data that we get from the randomized control trials is called experimental data. We can also do this in the laboratory. So economics can do laboratory experiments. If you are interested in game theory, you might encounter a lot of lab experiment. This is where we want to measure the behavior of our subjects. Like, for example, if there is new tax system, we want to know before the tax system is going to be implemented in public, we want to know how people is going to react in the new tax system. Like, for example, the new calculation of PPH, for example, then we can do a lab experiment. We can we can gather some volunteers to come in the laboratory, and then we're going to give them the game, the experiment, where they're going to do their tests with the new system. And then we're going to call other group. They're going to do the tests with the old system, or maybe if we have different system, then we can test that as well. So that's an economic example of economic laboratory experiment. Yeah. So that's experiments. And then the second point is sometimes it's difficult to do experiment in social science. Yeah, you can imagine with the natural science, it's going to be less complex because you can do, like, for example, if you have a plant and you want to know the effect of different fertilizer, then with the then you can just give you can just buy 2 exact plants and then give different fertilizer, and then you can monitor the growth of the plants. So that's not very complex, right? But with the social studies, it's going to be more complex than that. Because to do randomized control trial, for example, to do this, you have to make sure the control group and the treatment group is going to have similar characteristic other than being given the treatments. So that's not easy, and it's going to be expensive. And sometimes we also face with the ethical issue. Yeah, is it really ethical to just give the deworming medicine to one group and not to the other group just because we want to know the effect of the deworming medicine? It might not be very ethical, right, to do that, because everyone needs that medicine. That's for example. So that's why it's more difficult to obtain in social science. Okay, and the second type of data is the observational or retrospective data. Those are example of non-experimental data, like for example, the data from the SUSENAS or National Socioeconomic Survey, and the data from SAKERNAS or National Labor Force Survey, or any data that you can gather, like from BPS or maybe from World Bank, from CIC. Those are non-experimental data. In bahasa we call it data sekunder. Yeah, that's observational or retrospective data. Okay. Okay. Yep. So in an experiment, the researcher can control how and to whom the treatment is given. Yeah, like I told you before, we can control how and to whom the treatment is given, and the effect. Okay, this is example of experiment. Like for example, the effect of information on return to education on graduation rate. Yeah, so information is very valuable. Yeah, it can affect your future. The more information you have in anything that you are interested in is going to help you. Yeah, and here we want to see the effect of information on return to education on graduation rate. Okay. Oh, sorry. I say it wrongly. I mean, we want to see the effect of information on return to education on graduation rate. So, like for example, if I told you if I told you the information about the return to education, which is your potential income in the future, your potential career in the future, then it might encourage you better for you to graduate soon. You know, because okay, I have the potential to get a higher income. I have the potential to get a good career with this degree. So I want to graduate as fast as I can. So that's the effect of that information. The information as a treatment, I could, like, for example, for this class, I'm going to tell you all of the information. And then for other class, I'm not going to share any information of your potential income and your potential career. And then I want to know between these two class, which class is going to graduate faster from the other. Yeah, that's an experiment. That's an example of experiment. And then the deworming, this is what I illustrate before. The effect of deworming on school dropout rate. Like, for example, because the level of diarrhea is high in the rural area. So there are a lot of kids that due to their health condition, they have to drop out from school. And I want to know, okay, if I give them deworming medicine, will that help them to stay in school? Will that help them to lower the school dropout rate? So the deworming is the treatment, and the school dropout rate is going to be the outcome. Yeah, so that's an example of experiments that we can do in social science, but most of the time we cannot always do the experiment, yeah, because it's difficult, because maybe it's not ethical, and because it may be very expensive. So we don't do experiment, especially field experiments. So what we have to do is most of the time we're going to deal with the observational data. Why? Because we cannot control who receive the treatment. Yeah, like for example, with the information on the return to education, this information is actually free publicly, right? You can read this anywhere on the internet, in books, in magazine, whatever, and you know this information is free out there. So therefore, I cannot stop you, right, from getting the treatment or from getting the information. So that way, I cannot control who receive the treatment. And an example of the public policy setting, like for example, if the government will give you, for example, the government wants to give you scholarship, but in order for you to get the scholarship from the government, then you must register yourself and your socio-economic background. Nah, I cannot stop you, I cannot stop anyone from registering themselves, right? So therefore, I cannot control who will actually get the treatment and who will not get the treatment. Those who get the treatment are those who register themselves, and those who do not, it means that it's going those who do not register themselves. But I cannot stop anyone from registering. So this is the problem that we face in the social science. We cannot always do experiment. We most of the time have to deal with observational data, and we cannot control who receive the treatment. Okay, so why is it very, why experimental data is very important in the economic setting or social setting? Okay, let's get back to the example of plants with two exact same plants but two different fertilizer. Then we know that what's going to affect the growth of those plants is one and only fertilizer, right? So the different fertilizer. It means we already control other factor that can affect the growth except the fertilizer. In this setting, then we can have causal inference. We can have causation. Oh, the growth of the plant is going to be better or worse due to the fertilizer. So that's in the natural science, that's simple. But in the social science, because we cannot always control or isolate other factors, it's difficult to have causal inference. But with the experimental, because we can control how, who, and what the treatment is, it means that we can have causal inference. It means that we can have causation in here. Okay, so if experiment is being done very well and very ideal, then we can do causal inference. We will have causation relationship. But we cannot always do the experiment, right, in here, because most of the time we just have to deal with the observational data. Maybe it arises question in you. Okay, with the observational data, can we still do causal inference, or can we still conclude a causal relationship? We could, but very difficult and in a very complex analysis. We could, but we have to be careful. We have to be very careful because we will have a lot of assumptions and a lot of variable to control. Yeah, but yeah, because we are in social science, then we have to deal with that. We will learn how to do that later in this course, but not in the first week. Okay. So to answer this question, can we be certain of the causal effect of completing college degree on labor market or that of training on the labor market? The answer is it's possible. It's possible that we can get a causal effect, but only through a very deep and more complex analysis. Yeah. So the answer is we could, but we have to be very careful. Okay. Okay. Before I move to the challenge, do you have any question regarding the experimental and observational data? Not yet. Okay. So these are the challenge. Okay. So this is not like the challenge per se, but instead of this is one of the way to make sense of the data. This is ways to make sense of the data that you get or that we want to analyze. So we have inference, we have modeling, we have identification. Yeah. So what we mean by inference, inference is quantifying uncertainty due to limited data, or in the simple world, you want to make sense. You want to make sense and you want to get information from your limited data. Okay. And then modeling, making complex data comprehensible. Making complex data comprehensible. In other words, you want to simplify real world into a model. Yeah, you have discussed this in your introductory to economics one, I'm sure. And then the last one is identification. Identification is getting causality from non-experimental data. Yeah, so when you want to get causal inference from your observational data, then what you're going to do is identification. Okay, so let's talk about those 3 points one by one. Okay, yeah, the first one is inference. This is part that you have studied in your statistic course. Yeah, you have discussed about descriptive statistics. That's to know the distribution of the data. That's to display your data. That's to more or less understand how your data behave. Okay, but then you have inference. Inference statistics is what you do when you try to estimate sample statistic as the best estimation as population parameter, right? That's inferential statistic. You're going to do the same basically in econometrics when you do inference, okay? So because the inference is doing analysis in sample statistic as best estimation for population parameter, we have a very good example in here, polling for president election. Okay, so during an election, we usually have a lot of polls, right? Like who's going to potentially win the election? Let's do a polling, yeah. But when we do polling, we don't do that to like everyone in the country, right? What we're going to do is we're going to take a sample. Yeah, we're going to take sample that are representative of the population, and from those sample, we will do polling, and the result of the polling is the best estimation of who's going to win the election. Yeah, so polling for presidential election is an example of inference. Okay. And then, like I mentioned before, when you do an inference or you take sample, then be careful with anecdotes or the outliers, yeah, because we want this to be average. So anecdotes is not the same as data. What we want data as the average of the population, not anecdotes of or the outliers. Okay, so why we do inference or why we take sample? Because it is too costly to poll the entire population. Although it's less costly nowadays, it's still costly. And then what we have to be careful is the how many people must be polled before we can infer something about population preference. Yeah, so how many people we must be polled? This is where you're going to do sampling. Yeah, you know, sample has to be representative of the population. Then you have to consider a lot of factors, like for example, what's roughly the number of the population, and what do you think is going to be representative of that number? Like the number of sample should be representative of that. Like for example, if roughly the population is 1,000 people, then you cannot take the sample of maybe just 10 people. Yeah, that's not going to be representative. You're going to take more than that. Like for example, from 1,000, you take 500, for example, like 50% of the population. Yeah, that's going to be much better. The more and the closest to the number of the population is going to be better. And then also in terms of the characteristic, but it's not always possible, yeah, but if possible in terms of the characteristic, then you want the sample to be also representative of the population, okay? And then how do we quantify the uncertainty associated with the finite sample? Now, this you have study in your statistic because we have finite sample. Then here, we want to make sure that the distribution probability in the sample is going to approach the normal distribution. Yeah, if you forget, then I encourage you to reread your statistic notes. What we do here is we're going to convert the sample, the X in the sample in the Z score. So that's why we can make sure that the distribution of the probability is going to reach, is going to approach the normal distribution. Yeah, this point, central limits theorem is going to help here. Okay. And then let's talk a little bit about central limit theorem. The central limit theorem is one of the most important results in probability theory. The theorem suggests that Z transform of the sample mean is asymptotically standard normal. Yeah, this is what I said before. So if you transform your sample mean into Z score or Z, then asymptotically it's going to approach the standard normal distribution. Yeah, this is important point to pay attention when you do sampling. Other than take sample with as much as possible and as many as possible n, you have to take a careful attention on the central limit theorem. And then no matter what the shape of the original distribution, the sampling distribution of the mean approach normal probability distribution. Okay. Okay, so for the inference, basically that's a review of your statistic too. Do you have any question for the inference, or should I just continue to the modeling?
Can I ask, ma'am?
Mm-hmm.
Since just now you talked about how we must have an appropriate sample to be able to predict the results if we do the experiment on the population. Is there like appropriate percentage or a specific percentage where it will be a perfect size of sample from the population, ma'am? That's my question. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Very good question. Yeah. So is there any guidance or how many percentage of the sample should be from the population? The answer is yes, there is guidance. Do we really have 200% follow that guidance? It depends. It depends on the topic of your question. It depends on how big your population is. It depends on a lot of other things. But we do have a general guidance on how many percentage of the sample we should take from the population, and we call it as wait a minute. Why do I forget? Power method. Yeah, we call it power method. You will learn that in this class, but later later in not later in life, I mean later stage of this class. So with the power method, you can actually calculate. So given how many population you have, then using the formula of power method, then how many sample you should take. We have formula for that, and you will learn that later. Okay, thank you. Any other question?
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, not yet. I will continue. So, yep, let's do modeling. Modeling in economics is the simplification of real world, yeah. So models are actually maps of reality. Reality is complicated. Obviously, reality is very complicated. That's why we dream all the time, because reality is complicated. And then because reality is complicated, perfectly accurate map, a perfectly accurate map will be as large as the territory. And then we need map just as accurate enough to answer the question of the interest, and this varies within context. So what do we mean? Why we need a map that accurate enough to answer the question of interest? So I think we have a lot of example in here. I will talk about the example later. So like, for example, if you are interested in how your education is going to affect your future income, then you need to model that. Like, for example, how exactly the direction or the relationship direction between your education and your future income. Like, for example, you assume, oh, it should be in the positive direction. Then you can start your model by that assumption. Like, okay, and you're going to say that my future income is going to be positively affected by my education. And then you will have to identify, okay, other than my education, what are the other things that's going to affect my future income? And then you add that to the other factors that going to affect your future income. And then you will also take notes that, okay, there are other unobserved factors that could also affect my income. Now, from all of that assumption that you have, you can build a model, okay? When you build a model, in general, you will follow economic theory, yeah? So my example, in my example, you build your own model, but most of the time when you do economic analysis, you're going to build a model based on economic theory. Yeah, like for example, we have demand theory, right? We know that demand, the quantity of demand is going to be affected by the price of that goods, is going to be affected by your income, is going to be affected by price of other goods. So that's the base of the model. You will follow that theory to build a model, okay? Let's talk more about the modeling. Okay, so ideally we should start with economic model. In economics, the basic premise of a model, actually, I think it should be, ideally we should start with economic theory to build a model. Yeah, I think it should be a theory. Ideally, we should start with an economic theory. In economics, the basic premise of a model is the utility maximization. Yeah. For example, individuals choose consume basket that optimize their utility subject to budget constraint. Nah, you already learned this, yeah, in your microeconomics. We know that the consumption is going to be affected by the budget constraint. So consumption is subject to budget constraint. Then we can derive demand equation from that as the function of, like I mentioned before, of the price of that goods, of the price of other goods, and then of the individual's income, the individual's preference, or other things that relevant with the quantity of demanded. Yeah, so that's how you build a model. You go first with the theory, and then you build a model based on that. Okay, either you build that based on theory, yeah, of course, yeah, you will build that based on theory, but more than that, you can also adjust your model based on the previous literatures. Yeah, so that's why literature review is very important when you do research, because in the previous literatures, you may find interesting things that will complete the model that you built from the theory. Yeah, and it's encouraged to do that, to do a very deep literature review so that you can build your model very well. So the demand equation is the basis of econometric analysis of the consumer demand. Okay. Let's take a look at several examples of economic modeling. Okay, so this is a paper, there is a study from Gary Becker in the 68. Gary Becker tried to analyze the economic of crime. Yeah, it's very interesting. He said that individuals' participation in criminal activities has benefits and costs. Yeah, there is a benefit and cost in engaging in criminal activity. And here, Gary Becker modeled that as this equation here, where Y is going to be the hour spent in the criminal activity. So the hour spent in the criminal activity is the function of the factors here that Gary Becker mentioned and symbolized as x1, x2, blah, 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 until x7. Now, the factors in the right-hand side of the equation include wage in criminal activity, or like the benefit in criminal activity, and the hourly wage in legal employment, the income other than from the crime, and the probability of getting caught, and the probability of being convicted if get caught, and the expected sentence if convicted, and then age. So Gary Becker have a model that say that the hours spent in criminal activity is the function of wage in criminal activity, hourly wage in legal employment, income in other than from crime, and the probability of getting caught, and the probability of being convicted, and the expected sentence if convicted, and age. Okay, so that's interesting how he developed this model. Now, after we have the model, what do we do next? What we're going to do next is we're going to do the data analysis. So you find the data for each of these factor in here, and also for this variable in here. So that's more or less that's what you do in econometrics. Yeah, we're gonna analyze the data based on the model. Okay, so let's continue with the Gary Becker's model. The function f must be correctly specified to construct economic model. So the function which means how you're going to determine what factors is going to affect the hour spent in criminal activity. It should be specified correctly specified to construct economic model. How do you know if it's correctly specified? From the theory and from the previous studies. So when you do your undergraduate thesis, then you will have an economic model most likely, and the way you build the model is going to be in line with the theories and also with the feedback from the previous studies. Okay, so the function must be correctly specified. Okay, and then the second point, can we find the data for the variables in the model? It's very important, yeah, for us to have the data for the variable, because if not with the data, how else are we going to have analysis? Okay, so the econometric model of what Gary Becker did. So this is other distinction. So here, this is the economic model of the Gary Becker's But when we are going to translate that into the econometrics model, we will talk about this next week as well. So this is just like a review for you. The econometric model is like this. Yeah. With the econometric models, you will have this. No, this one. We will have a Greek letter in here, beta in here. So this Greek letter beta, we call it parameter. Yeah. The beta 0 is the constant, beta 1, beta 2, blah, 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 until beta 6 is the parameters. So with the econometrics model, you will have a parameter in front of the variable. So what's sitting next to the parameter is the variable. This is the x. Yeah. In the right hand side, we call the variable as x. In the right hand side is the variables that are going to explain how the variable in the left hand side behave. Okay, the variable in the left hand side, we call it as y. Okay, we can say that these are the variable that explain how this one here behave. Okay, and then the magnitude of how each of these variable going to explain this behavior is through the parameters. So the parameters tell us the magnitude of how the variable x is going to explain variable y behavior. Okay, so that's econometric model. We will dive more deeper into this in the next chapter. So don't worry if this is still new for you. And then we also have U in here. What is U? The terms U contains unobserved factors such as wage in criminal activity, moral character, family background, and other measurement error. So the unobserved factor, the other factors that can affect crime or explain crime, but are not listed in the variable X here, it's all going to be in U. So U is the other factors other than X that explain Y. Okay, we call it unobserved factor. Sometimes we call it as error. Yeah, we call it as error. Okay, next we're going to talk more about the error, but not today. So that's okay. Yeah, the terms U. Let's look more. The terms U contains important variables in the economic model that are unobserved. Yeah, I have said that before. I'll just read the note here. The U also capture measurement error, and then dealing with the error term U is the most important component in econometric analysis. Why? Because if we have U that going to be correlated with the X or with the Y, if we have U that's going to be correlated with X, then it's going to make our analysis bias. Okay, our analysis is going to be misleading. Yeah, so that's why it's very important to deal with the term U. But we'll talk about it in the several weeks from now. Okay. Okay, so those are that was example of a model. Let's take a look of another example of a model. Okay, hold on. I think. Okay. Okay, we have Minserian model in here. This is a very famous. Oh, yep. It seems like my tablet is a bit lagging. Okay, now we are in the correct slide. We have Minserian model. This is one of the very popular model in economic education. In the Minserian model, we consider an important model in labor economics referred to as Minserian model, where we have wage as the function of years of education, experience, and training, and also the unobserved factor. Okay. Okay. Is my voice clear or is it putus-putus?
It's clear, ma'am.
Okay, it's clear. Then this is my tablet, sorry. Okay, let's start a discussion in here. So with the Minsarian model, it is said that your wage is going to be affected by your education, experience, and training, and other factors. What do you think is going to encompass in the other factors? Can you think of any variable or any information that's going to be part of the U, please? If you have any opinion. Yes, Anindya, you can share your opinion.
I think some factors would include gender and also like family economic status.
Okay, very good. Gender and economic status. It could affect wage, yeah. And economic status, especially if you come from a wealthy family. If part of the U is your economic status and you are part of the wealthy family, then it will not only affect your future wage because you would probably go to a better channel to find a job, but it might also affect your education. Why? Because if you are from a wealthy family, then you will more likely to afford a better education than the others. Okay, then in that case, we will have U that is correlated with one of the X variable. We want to avoid that. Okay, when we build a model, we want to avoid a situation where U is going to be correlated with the explanatory variable or one of the X variable. Why is that? Because like I said before, when this unobserved factor is correlated with one of the X variable, then the magnitude of the beta one here, the magnitude effect of education here is going to be biased. Either we overestimate the beta one or we underestimate the beta one. Why we could overestimate or underestimate? Because there is part of beta one that should be in here. So that's why the result of beta one here bias. So it is important for us to make sure that we have U that is not correlated with the X in here. Okay. So that's interesting. And is there other example that could be part of the U?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Would location count? Like the location of the workplace?
Okay. Any other other than location? Okay, so location of where you work, that could absolutely affect your wage, but it's probably will not be correlated with the other X. And then I saw Sabrina raise her hand before. Do you have any opinion?
I was about to say the cost of living around, but it's similar to location actually.
Oh, okay. So the transport cost, yeah, the transport cost, it might also affect wage. But can you mention any more example of you that potentially also correlated with the year of education or your education in the return of, sorry, I mean return to the education other than like family wealth?
Age, ma'am.
Can you explain more why age?
Because if like we're older there, then we could be possibly like have more experiences and more education. Maybe like some people only got undergraduates, but if we're older, we could have like master degree and stuff.
Okay, very good. Age could affect sorry, age could be one of the factor in the U, but I think instead of it's going to affect the education part, I think it has more to do with it's going to more correlated with the experience, yeah, because the older you are, then it's mean that you have more experience in that. That may be also just because you work longer than the other, then it's going to be correlated with your experience. Okay. There is actually one factor in the U that will be correlated with the education. But it is very highly to be observed. That's ability. Yeah. So everyone, every students, every children will have different ability, and the ability is going to be correlated with their education, right? With the return to education. So because we cannot capture ability here. So the U is going to be correlated with the education. So we have to control this factor, yeah, to be able to have beta one that is not biased. Okay, let's discuss more about that. Okay. So we're going to move to, well, I mean, we're going to move on to the identification part. I have mentioned before that in the identification, we're going to determine the causal effect. Yeah, how do we determine the causal effect with non-experimental data? So when we want to determine the causal effect from the experimental data, the first thing that you have to identify from your model is the confounding variables. What is confounding variables? Confounding variables is an observed factor in the U that will be correlated with X. Like for example, family wealth, that's in the U, but it's going to affect the years of education. Yeah, that's the confounding variable. So we have to know that first, yeah, from our model. With the non-experimental data, we can conclude or determine causal effect. But first of all, find the confounding variables. After you find the confounding variables, then you will have to try to control that variable. And either you have to control that variable, and you have to make sure whether your methodology of analysis is still going to be relevant or not, or you need to change that to other methodology. But we're not going to talk about the methodology now. I want you to take notes how important it is to find the confounding variable. And you have to state what's the confounding variables and how the confounding variables is going to affect the X. Okay. Is there any way for us to control the confounding variable? Yes, there are ways for us to control the confounding variable. One of the way is to have IV or instrumental variable. Okay, instrumental variable is going to one of the way to solve the problem of confounding variable, but I will not explain what IV is, not today. I'm afraid it will discourage you to learn more about econometrics. We will talk about that when the time will come several weeks from now. Okay, but this is important. Yeah, this is the first thing that you should do is identify the confounding variable in order to be able to determine the causal effect of a non-experimental data. Okay, for example, this is some example of the research question that you can answer with causal effect using non-experimental data, but you have to find the confounding variable. Like for example, the effect of educational attainment on labor market earnings, the effect of high school quality on labor market earnings, the effect of smaller class size on elementary student achievement, and the effect of religiosity on annual donation. Okay. Okay, we have reached almost the final of this session. So this is the goal of this course. So let's read that together. So in this course, you will be introduced to introduced to standard statistical methods like linear regression model. Yeah. This is going to be our ongoing topics in this class, linear regression model. And you will also learn how to program in Stata with Samuel. And then at the end of this course, you then should be ready for the next sequence of econometrics. So read before you come to class, study before you come to class, method for successful econometric modeling, ways of coping with simultaneity and unobserved confounding variables, and empirical method used in applied economics and econometrics literature. I also expect us to read a lot of paper in this class. Okay. So so why you should be taking this class? Why you should learn econometrics? Why you should master econometrics? Actually, not just learn. There is a quote from Hol Varian, chief economist at Google. If this name is familiar to you, it's probably because he wrote your econometrics. Sorry, it's probably because he wrote your microeconomics textbook. Yeah, one of the textbook that we use in econometrics is written by Hol Varian. Hol Varian is chief economist at Google. He was asked, your job sounds extremely interesting. What job would you recommend to a young person with an interest and maybe a bachelor degree in economics? Hol Varian said, if you're looking for a career where your service will be in high demand, you should find something where you provide a scarce complementary service to something that getting ubiquitous and cheap. Okay, so what's getting ubiquitous and cheap? It's data. Data is everywhere. We can access data publicly most of the time, right? And what is the complementary to data analysis? So my recommendation is to take lots of course about how to manipulate and analyze data, database, machine learning, econometrics, statistic, visualization, and so on. So econometrics will help you to develop ability to analyze the data very well, yeah, and it will absolutely, I'm sure it will help you in your future career, especially in economics. Okay. Okay, talk about data. We have 4 broad classes of data. Okay, this is the last topic that we will discuss today. Broadly speaking, we have 4 types of data. We have cross-sectional data. Cross-sectional data is the data that you take from individuals, from firms, or your subject of interest in one time. Yeah, so you have a lot of subjects and you take the data one time. Like for example, data Susenas and Sakernas and Susi. Like for example, you take a look at Susenas in the year of 2001, for example. That's an example of cross-sectional data because you have a lot of individu that you take the data, but you only take that one time. Yeah, that's cross-sectional data. And then the next one, we have time series data. Time series data is a type of data with one individu, one object, one subject of interest, but the data is historical. So you have more than one time frames. Like for example, GDP series. Like Indonesia GDP, you take a look at GDP of Indonesia from, like for example, 2001 to 2005. That's a time series data. The time frame is more than one, but you have only one individu, one subject, one object. Okay, inflation rate, stock market data, and so on. And then the next one, we have what we call pooled cross-section. Pooled cross-section it's where you have cross-section data, but from multiple time frame. Okay, like for example, you have Susenas data, and you take that Susenas data from 2001, and then 2002, and then 2003. So the time frame is more than one, but the cross section is also more than one because we have Susenas 2001, Susenas 2002, and Susenas 2003. So that's full cross section. You can say this as like the combination of cross section and time series. Yeah. And then the last one, we have panel data. What is panel data? Panel data is actually panel data is actually pretty similar to the pooled cross-section. Why? Because this is also the combination of cross-section and time series, but what makes panel or longitudinal data different from pooled cross-section, what makes it different is that the individual that you have in each time frame is the same. Okay, so this is an example. Like for example, the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth in 79 have representative of more than 12,000 men and women in the age of 14 to 22. And then what this survey do is they're going to be interviewed the same men and women from 79 until 95. This is a longitudinal data. Why? Because the subject, the people that we interviewed is the same people. So that's panel data. With the cross-section, with the pooled cross-section, the individual that we surveyed or the individual that we interviewed does not have always to be the same. Like for example, the people that are surveyed in 2001 Susenas is not the same people as the people that are surveyed in Susenas 2002. Yeah, that's pooled cross-section, but with the panel, it has to be the same people, the same individual. Okay. Okay. So we have a quick question. I have a quick question for you here. This is the last one. The first one, the manager of Canteen FEB wants to know how people like their food selection. And then she lets customer fill out a survey about how they like the food selection in Canteen FEB. Nah, what type of data did the manager collect? Can any one of you answer this? Yes, Abizar?
I think the manager can survey the parameter or arrange the list to favorite food of the respondent by using like the Likert scale. The one that range 1 up to 5 being 1 is least favorite, to 5 being most favorite. And I think for the addition qualitative approach, the manager may add question like how respondent feel about certain food, like the ingredients or diet, healthy diet, and what makes your favorite food being favorite.
Okay, thank you, Abizar. But Abizar, I want to ask you, when the manager get the data, what type of data did the manager get? Is it, do you think it's cross-section data, time series data, pooled cross-section, or panel data?
Is it a cross-sectional data?
Yes, correct. So it's a cross-section data because the manager collect the data from many individual in one time only. Yeah. So the first one is the cross-section data. Thank you, Abizar. So the second question: students who take fundamental econometrics are required to fill out questionnaire about their basic information, including major, GPA, and gender. And I have collected the questionnaire for 3 years. What type of data do you think is this? Anyone? Yes, Ayesha?
Miss, I think it's the panel or longitudinal data because, like you said, normally for this type of data, they're collecting it from the same group of people, the same individuals each time over a course of a few years. And I think the students who take actually, it changes every year. So
Okay.
it's pooled cross-sections. Sorry,
Yeah,
it's pooled cross-sections.
Okay, correct. Very good, Ayesha. Yeah, you get it right. This is pooled cross-section, yeah. This is pooled cross-section. Wait a minute, pooled cross-section because the student change every year. Very good, Ayesha. You correct yourself in the middle. That's good. Okay, and then the last one, students who take. Okay, we have someone raise their hand. Do you want to answer the last one?
I'll try to answer, ma'am.
Okay.
I think since the students take statistic 1 and required to take statistic 2 and 3, which means that they're the same person and the questionnaire asks the same questions each time. So I think it's panel because having the same individual in different or multiple time frames.
Okay, very good. Sorry, how should I call your name? I have difficulty to read your name.
Salsa Dila, ma'am.
Okay. Salsa, yeah. Thank you, Salsa.
Welcome, ma'am.
Yeah, you guys are correct. So I'm glad. It means that you really pay attention to the material. So that's it, yeah. For today, I think I will finish the material. I'll see you next week. We will have two meeting, and I will share with you the username and password to Elok. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and see you next week. Bye bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
Ma'am,
you,
I
ma'am.
want to ask if we have like a presence form.
Oh yeah. For the attendance form, I will take the attendance myself, so you don't have to worry with the attendance form. Okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. Bye
Question
bye.
about the ELOC,
Uh-huh.
about the enrollment key. Where can we find it? Is it in the syllabus?
I will give you in semester later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah. Bye bye.